So, let's talk about vitamin D. A lot of us take it, right? It's the sunshine vitamin, the staple supplement for our bones, for our immune system. It just feels like a super simple, healthy thing to do. But what if the dose that everyone says is safe actually isn't? And that right there is the big question we're going to dig into. We're going to dive into some pretty surprising new research that really challenges more than a decade of health advice, and it suggests that when it comes to vitamin D, more isn't always better. Okay, so to really get what's going on here, we have to start with the basics. What even is vitamin D? Because the key isn't just what it does for us, but the very specific type of vitamin it is. And, that one little detail, it changes everything. All right, so here's the key detail. Vitamin D is what's called a fat-soluble vitamin. Now, what that means is that, unlike other vitamins, it doesn't just, get flushed out of your system if you take a little extra. Instead, your body actually holds on to it. It stores the excess in your liver and in your fat cells. Here's a great way to think about it. Water-soluble vitamins, they're kind of like watercolor paint. If you use too much, it just washes right off the page. No big deal. But fat-soluble vitamins, like our friend vitamin D, that's more like oil paint. Whatever you don't use gets stored away, and over time, that buildup can actually reach toxic levels. So because it can build up, it makes sense that health authorities would set a safety limit, right? And for vitamin D, for a long time, that magic number has been 4,000 international units, or IU, per day.
And look, this wasn't just some random number. I mean, for more than a decade, you had the major health authorities in the US and in Europe all agreeing 4,000 IU is the official do not exceed number for most people. It was considered the absolute ceiling of safety. It was pretty much set in stone. Well, until now.
Okay, so this is where things get really interesting. In 2023, a huge scientific review put that 4,000 IU limit under the microscope. And what they found, well, it was a total curveball.
Now, we're not talking about one little study here. This was a meta-analysis, which is basically a study of other studies. It's a really powerful way to get a big picture view. They combined the results from 22 different trials with almost 13,000 people. And what it did was look specifically at what happens when people take those high doses right up against that so-called safe limit for a long time.
So what did they find? Well, buckle up. First off, taking these high doses more than doubled the relative risk of something called hypercalcemia. Basically, that's when you get dangerously high levels of calcium in your blood, and that can cause some serious issues, like with your kidneys.
But the next finding, honestly, this one is even more shocking because it's a total paradox. Think about it. Why do people take vitamin D? For strong bones, to help prevent falls, right? Well, get this. This massive analysis found a 25% increased risk of falls for people on these higher doses. Wild, right? And if that wasn't enough, they also linked these doses to a 16% increased risk of being hospitalized for any reason. Just let that sink in for a second. We're talking about higher risks for high calcium, for falls, and for hospitalization, all from taking doses that, for a decade, we were told were perfectly safe. Okay, I know those numbers sound pretty alarming. So the big question is, what does this actually mean for us in the real world? To get that, we need to kind of shift from the lab to the clinic and see how doctors actually use vitamin D with their patients. So if you look at guidelines from a trusted source, like the UK's National Health Service, or NHS, you see a completely different approach. They're definitely not recommending 4,000 IU a day to everyone. Their strategy is way more moderate and targeted. You see, doctors don't just recommend a high dose to everyone. The first thing they do is check your blood levels to see where you actually stand, and the goal isn't to pump your levels up as high as possible. It's just to get you out of that deficient or insufficient zone and into that adequate range. And when you see their recommendations, the contrast is, well, it's huge. For most people, they might suggest a pretty small dose, like 400 IU, just during the darker winter months. For someone who is deficient, they might use something like 800 to 2,000 IU to maintain their levels. And those really high doses, the ones getting close to that 4,000 IU limit, those are basically reserved for very specific medical situations, and always with a doctor watching closely. Okay, so let's tie all this together. What's the takeaway here? It seems like the evidence is really pointing us toward a much smarter, more thoughtful way of thinking about vitamin D. It's time to move past this idea that more is always better
I mean, you don't even have to take my word for it. The authors of that big 2023 study said it themselves. They concluded that daily doses between 3,200 and 4,000 IUs are, and I'm quoting here, not completely safe because they increase the risk of these adverse events.
So what's the bottom line? A few things. First, science changes. That 4,000 IU limit, it's not gospel anymore. We have new, strong evidence challenging it. Second, we've got to respect the dose. High levels aren't risk-free. We now know they're linked to real side effects. Third, context is key. A standard maintenance dose of, say, 400 or 800 IU is a world away from taking a super high dose every single day for a long time. And all of this leads to the most important point of all. Talk to a professional. Seriously, never take anything near that upper limit without getting advice from your doctor first.
And that kind of leaves us with one last big question to chew on. You know, we call vitamin D the sunshine vitamin for a reason. And in our rush for a quick fix in a bottle, are we maybe trying to solve a problem with the pill when the real solution is, well, a little more natural? It's just something to think about, right? As we all try to find a more balanced way to approach this stuff.